In the future, humans don't go outside anymore and instead send out androids called surrogates to go through their daily routines. People control their surrogates from the comfort of their homes by using special chairs that connect them to the androids through neuropathic signals. If the surrogate is damaged, the person doesn't feel any pain, but they do experience all the pleasures the surrogates engage in. This allows people to make their surrogates all kinds of crazy stunts. They also can choose how they look, and now everyone on the streets looks young and beautiful. Crime and sickness quickly go down and society is losing its hate. However, a group of people called Dreads believe that surrogate mothers are tantamount to a lie, which is why they oppose their use and live in small isolation zones. Their leader is known as the Prophet, and he often makes radio broadcasts asking people to leave their chairs. One night in the city, rich man goes to a club and jumps into the crowd, then flirts with a woman who he takes into an alley so they can make out a little. At that moment, a strange figure appears and electrocutes both of them, destroys the deputies before escaping on a bicycle. The murderer drives so fast that car overturns and crashes. Moments later, the FBI agents Peters and Greer arrive at the scene. The police officer tells them that the male victim is not a registered surrogate mother, but the woman. However, the owner has not provided any information. Both surrogates have their eyes burned out and the man's memory chip is burned out, but Greer takes him for analysis anyway. Agents then break into the surrogate's owner's apartment and find him dead with a bleeding nose. When they check the controllers, they find that the last thing the surrogate saw was her partner's glowing eyes before the power was turned off. Greer then goes home and gets glasses of water, confirming that he is also using a surrogate. While the android parks in S closet, the real Greer leaves the control chair and enters the child's room, where he looks at a photo of, showing him with his wife and child. He then checks on his wife Maggie, who communicates with him via her surrogate mother on. Greer wants to go on vacation without using android body. He really wants to travel. He also points out that they haven't been together for a while, only their proxies are dating, and Maggie says it's better this way. The next morning, some students find Jared dead and covered in blood on a chair, meaning he was the one behind S destroyed male deputy. Moments later, Greer's boss Andrew tells the agents the details. 2 people died in the attack received by their deputy. Later, Greer and Peters review the records from the surrogate mother's memories and notice a man with a gun, so they conclude that it was probably a murder. They then receive a call telling them that Jared is the son of Lionel, the surrogacy father. His company VSI, or Virtual Self Industries, is one of the largest companies in the world, but Lionel was fired by his partners almost 10 years ago. Since then, Lionel has become a hermit. The agents are still looking for him and visit Lionel. They are met by one of Lionel's deputies, who explains that he has always been separated from Jared. He also gave Jared one of his deputies as a gift when he went to college, hoping it would help them form a bond. Peters asks a series of questions that upset Lionel, so Greer tries to calm him down by showing compassion for the fact that he also lost a son. When Greer asks if anyone would want to harm Lionel or Jared, Lionel realizes the killer had been trying to get him and hadn't known the surrogate was under Jared's control. Suddenly, the surrogate goes off and Lionel appears sitting on his chair as he has a breakdown because he caused his son's death. Afterward, Greer and Peters go to VSI to ask the representatives about people dying from their surrogates getting destroyed. The representatives get offended and swear the surrogates have fail-safes to avoid such problems. Next, the agents show the fried chip to an engineer, who inspects it and explains the only thing that could cause that is getting all the circuits fried at once. He also shows them that they recently received a truckload of SMG's hashtag from the military that were missing optics and ID chips. Agents are then sent to a military camp, where a group of proxies use the proxies to fight in a distant war. If the deputy is destroyed by gunfire, the person controlling it simply returns with a new. The colonel tells the agents that the weapons used by the military cannot affect the people they control. He also reveals that the military is removing some parts to keep them for analysis before. Later at the station, Peters finally identifies the man with the gun as Miles, a man who does not use surrogates. Soon technician Bobby, who doesn't use a surrogate either, informs them that the monitoring department has found Miles thanks to the FBI having access to all the surrogates feeds in the city. Peters stays with Bobby to keep track of Miles' movements while Greer rushes to join the pursuit team. Suddenly, an alarm goes off and Bobby sees a man harming a woman in a hotel, so he immediately gets a disconnection warrant to shut those surrogates down. Peters is shocked to learn this can be done and questions the morality and legality behind it, worried about the software potentially falling into the wrong hand. Meanwhile, Miles rides his bike through the city as the cops chase after him on cars, and Greer follows them on a helicopter. The bike allows Mike to make crazy moves and negotiate tight spots to gain an advantage. However, he ends up getting cornered and falls into an alley, allowing the police to immediately surround him. Miles suddenly draws his gun and shoots the officers, hitting them with a wave of electricity that causes the officers to convulse and make their eyes pop out of their heads. He then shoots S helicopter, causing Greer to quickly lose consciousness and the pilot to be electrocuted, causing to shut down the helicopter. Miles quickly makes his way to the Dread's compound, but is hit by a helicopter. At that moment, Greer returns to his deputy and also ends up in the terror zone. Luckily, he comes out with a broken arm and immediately begins to hunt Miles. But when the Dreads see that there is a deputy near them, they become angry and begins to hunt Greer as well. As they run through different sectors of the slums, Miles tries to use his weapon again but fails. To gain the upper hand, Greer jumps and climbs through various structures to a height only to be hit by a truck. Since he doesn't feel any pain, he just carries on until he finally manages to corner Miles and ask him for a gun. Miles gives him his bag, but before Greer can open it, he is suddenly shot. While Miles takes the bag back, the woman continues to shoot Greer and call him an abomination, causing him to break up with his deputy. At home, Greer is bleeding and tries to leave the room but passes out in the hallway. Luckily, Maggie finds him and calls an ambulance. Sometime later, Miles awakens to find Prophet and his men in his house looking for weapons. The Prophet wants to know where a weapon came from, so Miles admits he has no idea. An anonymous person contacts him at Brenner's phone number and pays him to use the weapon, but that's all he knows. News outlets soon report that Prophet sees the crashed helicopter as a personal attack on the Dreads and declares a revolution against the replacement company. Greer also wakes up in the hospital and learns from Andrew that he has been suspended. Enraged, Greer runs out of the hospital and meets with Peter, but he becomes dizzy while walking. This appears to be a side effect of using a surrogate. Peters tries to find a new replacement for him, but these random models seem unsuitable. Greer decides to go to the horror colony and is admitted there thanks to his real body. As he looks around, he is dismayed to see his representative crucified. He also learns that Miles has died and therefore attends S' funeral. The Prophet gives a speech reminding everyone that death is a sign of true humanity, which androids do not have. After the funeral, Greer tries to approach the Prophet, but his thugs beat him up while the Prophet reminds him that feeling pain is a real human experience. When Greer asks about weapons, the Prophet laughs and responds with sarcasm, makes Greer go. Prophet then enters his trailer and discovers that he has hidden S' weapon under the floor. Meanwhile, Greer is picked up by another Lionel deputy, who explains to that he is using a new model because his life is in danger. Greer tells him that the murderer of Jared was killed by the Prophet and tells him his story. His son died in a car accident, and there is nothing worse in the world than a parent outliving their child. Lionel points out that if they find number where the gun came from, they will find out who is trying to kill him. Couldn't come from Dreads because they don't have enough resources. When Greer returns home, Greer finds Maggie having a wild party with her friend. He argues with her alone because he really wants to see her and not as a hedonistic surrogate mother. Maggie says she's changed and that's impossible. At exit, Greer gets upset and beats up the partygoer until he sees metal under the fake skin. After Greer leaves, surrogate Maggie looks at the real body in the chair. Maggie takes off her glasses and cries. Greer returns to headquarters and learns that VSI concluded a contract with the military for weapons, but it was canceled and the reason was kept secret. That evening, Surrogate breaks into Peter's house to check all of her stool records and learns about Bobby's software that allows to deactivate all of the surrogates. He then shoots Peters several times before stealing her system and connecting her to a new person. At headquarters, Peter's deputy is ready for action. The next day, Greer meets with the colonel again and shows him a photo of the weapon. The colonel admits that this is weapon which the military had ordered, but all prototypes were allegedly destroyed after it was discovered that it also killed the people behind the proxies. When Greer informs him that the Dreads have weapons, the colonel announces that the military will be responsible for getting him back. In the Dreadlock Zone, the Prophet distributes weapons to his men and orders them to give them to Peter. Later, Greer tries to talk to Maggie about their relationship and the loss of her son. Maggie is upset and realizes that she is only alive today thanks to the surrogate mother who saved from real life. When Greer insists on discussing the matter, Maggie abandons her surrogate and her real mother takes the cure. Soon the military invades the Dreadlock Zone to capture S weapons. As the locals panic and hide, the Prophet and his men attempt to escape, but are cornered by soldiers. Both sides immediately open fire, but the military has men and weapons, so the Prophet's group is quickly routed. The Prophet was shot in trial, and when the soldiers approached him, they were shocked to see that he was a surrogate mother. It turns out that Lionel was controlling the Prophet all along. Meanwhile, Greer meets with Peters, who tells him that Andrew hired Miles to kill Lionel. Greer immediately goes to S headquarters to confront Andrew and deduces that VSI gave him a gun to kill Lionel for his anti-surrogacy movement. When Andrew looks away, Greer stabs him in the back of the head, causing Surrogate to pass out. Greer then checks Andrew's computer and downloads all the information related to conspiracy. As Greer leaves the building, the Real Andrew calls the other agents and orders them to call to arrest Greer for assault. Greer then meets Peters in his car, not yet suspecting that there is a new person behind the surrogate mother. Greer explains that Andrew's files show that Lionel is funding the anti-surrogacy movement and that he has found the codes needed to activate the special weapon. Peters calls headquarters to tell them where to find Greer, and suddenly they are hit by a truck, sending S car flying off the road. As Peters leaves with the gun and passwords, Greer pursues them, and a brutal chase ensues, resulting in many accidents and much destruction on the streets. Peters' replacement body allows her to evade him with amazing leap, and Greer ends up crashing into a store inn, allowing Peters to escape. Soon the FBI group agents show up looking for Greer, so he hides and sneaks out to steal the car. He then calls Bobby and asks him to cut ties with Peters' surrogate, but it's too late. Peters got to him first and handcuffs Bobby. Peters is now attempting to gain access to the entire delegate network. At this point, Andrew finds her and tries to bring her to her senses, but learns that Lionel is controlling her. A desperate Andrew tries to convince Lionel that surrogates are good for humanity, but Lionel wants people to live like actual humans and fires the weapon to kill Andrew as revenge for his son's death. Next, Peters starts uploading a virus to the surrogate network, intending to kill every person using one. Moments later, Greer breaks into Lionel's house and shoots the surrogate guards to force his way inside. He searches the house and eventually finds a hidden door that he goes through, finding a room filled with surrogates, including the Prophet and Peter's killer. Lionel is in a wheelchair pointing a gun at Greer and explains that people inside surrogates are already dead anyway, so he's doing humanity a favor. Computer announces that the virus download is complete. Lionel is pleased, removes it himself using S chemical compound, then removes Lionel from his chair and contacts Peter's surrogate. He immediately calls Bobby, who gives him instructions on how to stop the virus. Greer manages to interrupt the transmission for another second, saving all the human users, but the virus still reaches S proxies, destroying them all. Bobby also wants to teach Greer how to stop it, but Greer allows it to continue so the world is free of If virus becomes active, the FBI. An agent comes and shoots Peter's surrogate mother. Soon, the proxies on world close and begin to fall, filling the streets and buildings with lifeless robots. Greer leaves Lionel's house and watches as people leave the house feeling dazed and confused. When he returns home Greer is finally able to hug the real Maggie again. The news reports that S deputies are no longer working, but no one was injured, so humanity now has to get used to life again. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.